Science and scientism. Can a scientist believe in miracles? I'm a scientist. I believe in miracles. Therefore, the answer is yes. But I'm not going to sit down. I want to say a bit more about that. Actually, my belief stands in a long line of great scientists of history, people like Newton, Boyle, Dalton, Faraday, Maxwell, and many, many others who all believed in miracles. How do we know that they did? Because they were serious Christian believers. The heart of the Christian faith lies in the death of Jesus of Nazareth on the cross and his resurrection from the dead. That was the message of the earliest believers. The disciples, they took that message out as they spread from Jerusalem and eventually transformed the ancient world. Every Christian worthy of the name believes in at least the miracle of the resurrection. And beyond a doubt, all of those great scientists that I just mentioned, and many others, believed in the resurrection, and so do I. Yet, there are loads of people today who think that you can't possibly practice science if you take such things as miracles seriously, and that you can't believe in miracles if you take seriously such things as modern science. And I wonder why that is. Well, one explanation is that some people have bought into the ideas of scientism. Scientism is the belief that all the real knowledge there is science. Now, by science, I mean, and most people mean, natural science. The sorts of things that are discovered by physics and chemistry and biology and geology and cosmology and so on. So it is natural science that has gained enormous prestige based on its amazing success in describing the natural world and in the powerful technologies that it has spawned. And that success has led many to suppose that science is the royal, almost in a certain sense, the universal road to all knowledge. So, for example, the atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell put it like this in his 1935 book, Religion and Science, quote, "Whatever knowledge is attainable must be attained by scientific methods, and what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know." End quote. But natural science has distinctive characteristic approaches to knowledge, namely repeatable experiment or observation, and special emphasis on the sort of clarity that comes from measurements and systematization and mathematics. And it cannot, because of that, accommodate lots of important questions in the world that actually surround us. And yet we know many important things about those questions. So, in my view, scientism, the belief that science is all the real knowledge there is just simply a ghastly intellectual error. Another reason that people might suppose that miracles can't happen, and perhaps it's a more logically defensible reason, is that the success of science has led them to a metaphysical belief that the universe is a closed system of universal laws, impervious to any influence from beyond those laws. If that was so, then even if there were a creator of the world, he would be forced to stand on the sidelines once the universe has begun, and therefore be essentially irrelevant to it. The Christian God, who is active in the world, is, under that belief, ruled out. Now, this faith in the inviolability of natural law is actually not something that science has or even could discover. Science works with a program and an intention of describing the universe, the natural world, naturally. That is, describing the way the universe normally works, the normal course of nature. Science's success, though, is not a proof that the world can never work differently, or that the laws of nature are inviolable. Science's whole approach depends upon reproducible experiments or observations. But if an observation is unique, or unreproducible, then science is not really able to explain it. But miracles are inherently unreproducible. They're unique events, never to be repeated. Therefore, science is hamstrung in investigating them. It's impossible to demonstrate scientifically that any event is a miracle. Science can contribute an assessment of whether an event can be considered part of a normal course of events, or in other words, whether it's consistent with the laws of nature. But if science shows that some event is consistent with the known physical laws, that does not constitute a disproof of the possibility that God is acting in the world. Now, I think I should take just a moment to think about the definition of a miracle. Now, of course, we're not here this evening talking about the metaphorical use of the word, simply to mean something wonderful or to be marveled at. I mean, surely nobody, even us crass scientists, can fail to marvel at the wonders and beauty of nature, the universe, the biosphere, music, etc., etc. So let's set that metaphorical meaning aside. That's not what we're talking about. But many people think that the operational definition of a miracle is that it is something that violates the laws of nature, That, I want to say, is a mistake, because such a definition would have made no sense to anyone prior to the scientific revolution. Prior to the scientific revolution, people didn't think in terms of the laws of nature or the laws of physics. Miracles, for example, in the New Testament, which are probably the most important ones for the credibility of Christianity, were of course not defined as violations of natural law. The three different Greek words that describe what we in English generally call miracles, in the New Testament meant signs or wonders or works of power. About the only things that they have in a certain sense in common are that they describe events that are extraordinary and that they were seen as being acts of God. So actually a short definition of sort of New Testament meaning of miracle is to say that a miracle is an extraordinary act of God. Some of the events in the New Testament seem to have explanation consistent with the normal laws of nature, the normal working of the world. But some don't. For example, the instant turning of water into wine, that breaks a law of nature. But others break no law of nature. For example, the prediction by Jesus that before the cock would crow on the night before the crucifixion, Peter would deny him 3 times, that breaks no law of nature. Could have been a lucky guess. But both of those events are seen by the New Testament writers as signs of God at work in an extraordinary way. And so I would argue that it's a mistake to define a miracle as a violation of natural law, and I don't. In order to see or perceive a miracle, it requires interpretation. Miracles, I think, are never totally self-authenticating. It's always possible for a determined skeptic to doubt testimony, however strong might be the evidence. And since miracles are inherently unreproducible, science's insistence on reproducibility cannot be used to resolve doubts. This, I think, is the reason why Jesus often linked miracles to faith. Unless you are open to the possibility that God might work in the world, you're unlikely to be convinced that he has done so in an extraordinary way in any particular case. So I would argue that perception of a miracle requires at least as enough openness to be willing to consider the possibility that God is at work. Now, those of us who are, like me, who are open, are, on the other hand, not called to a blind belief in all miracle claims. It's perfectly reasonable for Christian believers to take the view that they should examine miracle claims critically to assess how plausible they are. And I don't for a moment believe all the superstitious claims to miracles from the Middle Ages, or for that matter of today. Neither, by the way, does, for example, the Roman Catholic Church. Science can be part of the process of assessment, but many other disciplines are necessary. And seeing any event as the act of an intelligent agent is actually an interpretation that goes beyond the methods of science. That's even true of interpreting the acts of humans, perceiving them as intelligent agents. So it shouldn't be surprising that it's also true of the acts of God. The way that you establish the truth of historical claims, like the resurrection of Jesus, or, for example, that Julius Caesar was assassinated on the steps of the Roman Senate in 44 BC, is of course not by, quote, purely and entirely scientific methods, end quote, as atheist Richard Dawkins claims. The evidence one should seek for historical claims isn't scientific evidence, it's historical evidence. The evidence we're going to seek is going to be, for example, a predominantly documentary, personal, maybe even eyewitness testimony, perhaps some archaeological evidence, all gathered together and taking advantage of our general understanding of what makes people tick, and the attitudes and thinking and the background history of the times in which the events occurred. So the Christian faith is that the greatest miracle of all, the incarnation of the Son of God and his death and resurrection, has opened the way for us humans to experience a personal relationship with the Creator of the universe. Experience of that personal relationship growing through spiritual disciplines, worship, prayer, and the practice of love in our lives gives us strong reason to believe that God is at work in our world, and sometimes is at work in extraordinary ways. And that's another reason why Christians, whether they're scientists or not, can believe in miracles. Thank you very much.